In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Let's begin. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Saint Jerome, pray for us. Saint Raymond, Peñafort, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. I think you can all hear me. They say I talk too much, but do I talk too loud? No. You can hear me. Okay, good. I'm really happy to have Terry Schilling with us tonight. He's the president of the American Principles Project, which is a political organization dedicated to organizing families and politics to protect and defend the American family. Terry is a native of the Quad Cities in Illinois. What are the Quad Cities? There are 4 cities in Illinois, I know that. But
there are 2 in the Illinois side and then 2 on the Iowa side. On Iowa, it's Davenport and Bendorf. And in Illinois, it's Moline and Rock Island.
Okay, there you go. All right. He grew up there as the oldest of 10 children in a devout Catholic family. He entered politics, working on numerous political campaigns, including those of Senator Sam Brownback and Representative Chris Smith. He's also managed the campaign of his father, Representative Bobby Schilling, who defeated an entrenched anti-family incumbent by 10 points in 2010. Terry's been with APP since 2013, and he's responsible for developing, coordinating, and implementing the organization's strategy, messaging, and grassroots activity at the federal, state levels. This year, Terry directed the launch of APP's Big Family, a new program aimed at mobilizing families across the country to become America's most powerful special interest group, rivaling big business, big oil, and big tech. When he's not at work advocating on behalf of families, Terry can be found spending time with his own growing family, his beloved wife Katie, and with children Grace, Reagan? Good, like that. Bobby, Max, and Peter. They live over in Burke, and their parishioner's Holy Spirit. They, you tell me you used to be a parishioner here for a little while?
Yep,
a few years?
2013.
So, I'm really happy to have him here this evening, and I'm really happy to see all of you this evening. And you know that I'm trying to get y'all motivated for, of course, the voting's coming up, but also motivated to, you've got to change the way things are. Okay? Priests can't do that. I mean, there's some things we can do, but you've got to change, and you've got to step up and take leadership and get involved. And Terry's going to help us with that tonight. So I'm really happy to have him. And his topic tonight is why I removed my children from Fairfax County Public Schools and how to fight back.
Before I begin, I'd just like to thank a few people for making this event possible. Bob Laird, of course, and Mary Butler. Thank you guys so much for helping coordinate this. I'd like to also obviously thank my beautiful wife Katie for everything she does. But more than anyone, I'd like to thank Father DeSales for his heroic leadership that he continues to show every day. At a moment when so many good and decent people are backing away from all of these important fights, Father DeSales has stepped into the arena and risen to the challenge to be a champion for our families and our nation. I actually told my good friend Billy Valentine, who was a parishioner here when I first moved out here, that if every parish in the country had a Father DeSales, this country would be in a much better position. Thank you. As Father said, I'm Terry Schilling. I'm the president of American Principles Project. We're a political organization that is dedicated to ensuring that families are prioritized in public policy. So we organize families and get them engaged to fight the enemies of the American way of life. And we primarily focus on fighting the indoctrination of our children into critical race theory and gender ideology. We focus on protecting the integrity of our elections. And we also focus on protecting children online from pornography. We want to protect the ability of families to organize and engage in politics as well, so we fight against big tech and fight to protect our ability to organize online and promote our ideas. Most importantly, even more important than my job at APP, I'm Katie's husband, and I'm father of our 5 children whom we're raising here in Fairfax County. And it should come as no surprise to anyone in the room, since it's the title of my talk, After years of sending our kids to Fairfax County Public Schools, Katie and I decided to pull our children out. But why? Why did we choose to cut our budget and spend all that extra money on Catholic schooling when we could get access to public schools for free? And there's really one simple reason why we did that. Because sending your children to Fairfax County Public Schools is child abuse. It's child abuse to teach children that their nation is inherently evil and irredeemable and built on racism. It's child abuse to teach and encourage children to change their gender. It's child abuse to instruct children to think in terms of race, to teach them that the color of their skin determines the content of their character, and that they're either eternal victims or eternal oppressors without any hope for redemption. It's child abuse to teach children that mothers and fathers aren't necessary. It's child abuse to teach children that their mothers and fathers are not legitimate authorities for truth and morality. But on a more fundamental and basic level, it's child abuse to deny children a high-quality education that prepares them to be critical thinkers, capable of reading and understanding, capable of basic math and writing. Our public schools are destroying our children, and they're robbing them of a promising future. There are a few topics, in my opinion, that are more important today than the rapidly deteriorating state of our nation's educational system. The system has been in decline for at least half a century, but in my view, it's become exponentially worse over just the past decade. While the task of education has always been difficult, the problems we face now are the most urgent and potentially damaging in living memory. Over the past year or two, a record number of parents have begun to take their children out of the public education system. By some measures, between spring and fall of last year, homeschooling rates doubled. Anecdotally, Catholic and other non-public schools across the country have reported a massive influx of new applicants fleeing their local public school. While most of this was in response to the draconian COVID measures and restrictions and school closures, I believe that COVID, in my opinion, merely exacerbated and exposed many of the problems which have been brewing under the surface of the public education system for many, many years. For my own part, when we decided last year to take our children out of public school, COVID was just a small part of our reasoning. More pressing was the pattern of educational decline in the public education system over the past few decades, and the increasing trend of harmful indoctrination into evil and, I would say, anti-Catholic ideologies. Our primary duty as parents is to protect our children and to raise and educate them well. Looking at the state of public education in America today, we determined that leaving our children in public schools would be entirely inconsistent with that grave duty. Public education has changed. Through new mandated curricula and activist teachers, kids are being taught to be ashamed of their country, hate the traditional Judeo-Christian values of their parents and ancestors, judge themselves and their peers based on skin color, and to embrace a new sexual agenda that denies the differences between male and female and encourages perversion. Schools are working right now to dismantle the values that we as parents instill in our children because they consider us to be bigoted and backwards and are instead replacing them with a new set of woke values that kids are completely unprepared to resist. At the same time as they are pushing these new political and cultural dogmas, public schools have lowered their academic standards to the point where they can hardly be called educational institutions. Schools across the country are getting rid of standardized tests, traditional grading systems, and even historical facts that they deem bigoted in one way or another. Our nation's students are falling behind. Last year, here in Fairfax County, the rate of middle school students receiving an F in 2 or more classes tripled. Among high school students, it rose by 50%. But that problem predates COVID. The quality of public education has been declining for decades. If you look at the public school graduation exams from 100 years ago, I'd be surprised if most adults could pass them today. The response to this from the top is to say that we need more of the same. Joe Biden's American Families Plan states, quote, "Everyone knows that 12 years of education is not enough today." And that is true. but only because our schools have replaced the fundamentals with radical curricula to the great detriment of our students. As it stands now, about 2/3 of students in America are not considered proficient readers, even by today's standards, and that percentage is climbing. Very little of this has to do with the actual teachers on the front lines, many of whom are dedicated and devoted public servants. Instead, much of this problem has to do with a shift in philosophy that has become fashionable many decades ago and filtered down through administrations and school boards, as well as through the laws. The first phase of this change came with the eradication of standards. Fueled at the top by prevailing theories of moral relativism, school systems, and certain activist teachers began to profess that the establishment of certain standards was, in fact, impossible. Who are we, for example, to say that the norms of the West are better than the norms of any other culture? Who are we to say that a certain work of art, or literature, or poetry is better than any other, and therefore worth reading? Who are we especially to say that the moral norms of Judeo-Christian tradition are uniquely capable of securing our own happiness and human flourishing? In this last case, the implications for sexual education in particular were immediately apparent and damaging. And it took real fights on the ground simply for parents to gain any ability just to opt their children out of these classes. Along with this change came certain changes in terminology. Instead of literature and grammar, the educational establishment began using much vaguer terminology of language arts. And instead of teaching civics or history, teachers began examining vague social forces through the newly coined subjects of social studies. Teachers themselves were largely powerless to stop it. Even if they personally disagreed, they were locked in by local mandates. And even if those local mandates and regulations were relatively lax, they still had to face the fact that their performance and their students' academic prospects would be evaluated based on standardized tests and college admissions processes that were entirely beyond their control. I'm sure none of this is new to many of you in the room. We as Catholics have been dealing with the consequences of a secularized and morally relativistic society for the better part of a century. It's the same ideology that in the 1960s led the Supreme Court to ban prayer in public schools. I'm going to go a little bit off script here. Think about this. In 1962, the Supreme Court banned prayer in public school because they didn't want to indoctrinate children into certain values. And now what are they teaching our children? Over the past decade, and especially the past few years, this old philosophy has morphed into something even more sinister. It no longer professes to be agnostic about the good, the true, or the beautiful. It no longer pretends to aim for a diversity of opinion. Instead, it seeks to enforce its ideology with every coercive tool it can get its hands on. In many situations, the consequences are similar to that of the moral relativism regime, only more aggressive and severe. Educational standards are still eroded and disregarded, but no longer on the grounds that all standards are equally valid. Now, the prevailing philosophy argues that the very existence of educational standards is evil and bigoted. Part of this is due to their shame at the public school system's abysmal failure among poorer, disproportionately non-white students. Seeing the low scores coming out of failing schools, administrators in some districts have chosen to revamp or eliminate the grades and tests that quantify these schools' failure, calling the very use of these metrics racist. I want to reiterate this point because it's very important, that when the data began to show overwhelmingly that our public schools were failing Black and Hispanic students, rather than give them a better education or make serious reforms to help these minority children, they eliminated the only way schools could measure progress. They harmed the Black community while carrying a cheap banner of so-called anti-racism. I'd say that this is insane, but in fact it's worse than that. It's evil. This attitude is echoed at the very highest levels of the academic establishment. Last year, the Smithsonian, we're not talking about some random small group, the Smithsonian published a list of supposedly racist assumptions and expectations of a so-called white dominant culture. Among the supposedly white values that needed to be reassessed were self-reliance, politeness, planning for the future, schedules, grammatical rules, cause and effect relationships, and objective, rational, linear thinking. It's hard to imagine anything more racist than that, or more damaging. Also included in this list of supposedly racist concepts were the nuclear family, the Western tradition, and Judeo-Christian values, including monotheism. The new philosophy has an intense hatred for anything remotely traditional. They argue that schools need to be decolonized, removing anything that might lead a student to think that Western civilization, Christianity, or America are good. Where they used to couch this argument in terms of moral relativism, their hostility is now completely open. America and the Judeo-Christian tradition, they claim, are bigoted and evil. Take, for example, the rapid spread of the 1619 Project, a new curriculum based on an essay series first published in the New York Times. The 1619 Project, as I'm sure many of you are aware, claims that America is indelibly racist, built on slavery, and that the true founding date of America is the day that the first African slaves were brought to the Virginia colony. This curriculum has since been adopted and mandated by school boards across the country, with nonprofits awarding administrators and teachers thousands of dollars in grants for overseeing its implementation in their local communities. But perhaps the most alarming aspects of the new philosophy are the areas of sexuality and gender, the details of which are almost too disgusting to repeat. Many of you will remember that there was a time when sex education was not included in public schools. Sexual revolution activists argued, children are going to have sex anyway, we might as well teach them how to do it safely. When you fast forward to today, that same philosophy is being used to instruct children in many other areas, including sodomy, self-abuse, and so-called porn literacy and gender ideology as required topics. And they uniformly portray them as positive goods. These concepts are being introduced at younger and younger ages. Children as young as preschool are taught that their gender is changeable and entirely up to them. Parents, in many cases, no longer have the ability to opt out, since these concepts are not explicitly labeled as a sexual education program, but instead permeate every program and class of the school. School districts implement policies for bathrooms, locker rooms, sports, and pronouns that reflect this ideology. The ideology is taught, enforced, and tested in class, echoed in anti-bullying programs, and even in the school's library. I'm sure many of you saw this week, or last week, one heroic mother in Fairfax County recently made headlines by calling attention at a Fairfax County School Board meeting to the explicitly pornographic depictions of homosexual and pedophilic behavior in a number of books in the school's library system. Homosexual and pedophilic books in our school's library. At least one of these books is on the recommended reading list for young adults produced by the American Library Association. Ironically, under this push for acceptance of identities, children's true God-given identities are under more harsh attack than ever before. White children are told that their race forever brands them with uncleansable guilt. Non-white children are told to embrace an ideology that situates them in their own minds eternally as objects of oppression. Boys and girls of all races are pressured and coerced into rejecting their own gender and led in no uncertain terms to understand that a failure to do so brands them as a member of the oppressor class. Girls are pushed towards birth control as early as possible. 10-year-old boys who act like 10-year-old boys are pathologized and punished. Children are taught to view themselves and their peers not as children of God, but as members of intersecting identity groups that mark them as oppressors or oppressed. Some public school curricula make this explicit, encouraging young children to rank themselves and their peers by their supposed privilege. This is a huge problem. Schools are getting rid of everything a kid needs to be educated and offering instead a woke indoctrination. One that focuses on encouraging victim mentality, discouraging patriotism, distrusting their parents' values and beliefs, and normalizing the sexual ethics of the modern world. It assaults their innocence, denigrates their country and faith, and deliberately alienates them from their parents. Is it any wonder that our children are losing their faith in droves, or that rates of depression and suicide among children are skyrocketing? As Catholics and as parents, we have a duty to our children to educate them, to pass on the tenets of our faith, and to protect their innocence. Public school system is now not simply unhelpful to us in performing these duties, it actively attempts to undermine us. According to Catholic social teaching, parents are the primary educators of their children, both in terms of their rights and in terms of their duties. The new philosophy absolutely hates this idea. Just 2 days ago, in the Virginia gubernatorial debate, Terry McAuliffe summed up the prevailing attitude amongst academics, school administrators, and politicians today. He said, quote, "I'm not going to let parents come into schools and actually take books out and make their own decisions. I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach." Terry McAuliffe made the mistake of saying the quiet part out loud. At the outset of the pandemic, some teachers worried openly on Twitter about the effects of online learning on their students. Not because of the increased depression or suicide rates or the drop of quality in the actual education, but because they were worried that parents would be able to hear and possibly object to what they were teaching in class and undermine their mission. Others worried that parents might learn that their son or daughter, when at school, professed to be a member of the opposite sex. I don't mean to depress you all by listening to these examples, but I mean to illustrate to you the magnitude and urgency of this crisis. The question is, what do we do about it? How do we fight back? First and foremost, if you have a child in public school, get them out now. Don't wait another moment. This woke ideology and educational failure permeates the Fairfax County school system almost completely. You may think you can't afford private tuition, but in reality, you can't afford to keep your kids in these child abuse centers. If you can't afford it, talk to your priest, talk to the principal, talk to your family and friends. Help is out there if you're willing to look. Ask your priest to consider adopting a similar program offered here by Father DeSales that gives families $2,000 per child when they switch from public to Catholic school. Father DeSales Parish offers this not just for students, all students in Fairfax, or offers this for all students in Fairfax, not just parishioners. Is that right, Father? I don't know. I commit you to...
Just parishioners.
Just parishioners. Okay. Well, so even more reason to do that. Sorry for being too generous. There is help out there, and as parents, we are called to die for our children as necessary. I know that it's easy to come up with reasons not to. It's easy to think, well, that craziness will never come here. Unfortunately, it's already here. It's easy to think that your child is too young to have to deal with any of this, but I can assure you that's not the case. Children as young as preschool are being subjected to this ideology. It's also easy to think, well, I know my child's teacher and he or she would never go for this sort of thing. I wouldn't be too sure. But even if that is the case, there's only so much this teacher will be able to do in the face of a system hell-bent on enforcing total ideological conformity. When Tanner Cross, a Loudoun County Public School gym teacher, told the school board that he would not lie to confuse children by using their preferred pronouns, he was immediately fired. His case is now making its way to the courts. It's also easy to think, my child is strong and will be able to resist. And while I pray that that's true, are you really willing to take that risk? Cast not your pearls before swine. Is your child strong enough to resist his teachers, his peers, pop culture, social media, and the expectation of colleges he might apply to? It's hard for us now as adults to resist this. It's got to be impossible for our children. One major cost of sending your kids to public schools is the lack of community. The Catholic school community is incredible. Our children go to Holy Spirit Catholic School, And there is a vibrant and beautiful community that we have become a part of. A community that I denied to my family for far too long. Your son or daughter only gets one childhood. What they learn in elementary, and middle, or high school will shape them as a person. It will stay with them forever. Our job as parents is to make sure that they are taught things that are true, and they are being formed into the people who will love God, love His church, and will be willing to fight for it when the time comes. Don't force them into the fight before they're ready. You need to make sure that they have the right defenses built up, that they're strong, that the fight will come, and it's our job to prepare them for it. But when they're 9, 13, 15, they are simply not prepared to fight the entire world on their own. There are many options available: homeschooling, co-ops, parochial schools, even some online academies. And here's something big that I really want to stress. Do not think that you are incapable of teaching your own children, or that you need to place your kids' education in the hands of experts. You taught your children to count, to speak, to walk, and as Katie and I can tell you, we taught them how to potty train, which is quite an experience. It is very hard to potty train a child. We did that. As parents, we're experts. We are experts on our children, who they are. One other thing I want to add about these experts that are teaching our children. Have you spent any time with these experts that are teaching our children in school? They're often 23, 24 years old. They aren't that smart. And most likely, they at least aren't much smarter than you. The experts nowadays are not those with actual wisdom, but those credentialed at elite institutions and steeped in the ideology that is actively harming our children. You will certainly do a better job than they will. Another thing that you can do to help is consider helping those of your fellow parents, especially your fellow parishioners, who may not have the means to remove their children from public school. Father DeSales published a letter to his parishioners in which he stated that he had long been contemplating whether or not it was a grave sin for Catholics to send their children to public schools in Fairfax County. Came to the decision that in fact it was. It was a grave sin. Such a grave sin that he felt obligated to financially help families afford to attend Catholic schools. He was right and courageous. Donate to these programs. Start one at your own parish. Sponsor a family or a student. Pitch in. Fairfax County is the wealthiest county in the nation. But should we as Catholics stop at simply pulling our own children out of public schools? I emphatically answer we should not and we cannot. We must reclaim public education for many reasons, the least of which is that it's our tax dollars funding this atrocity. The biggest reason is that our children will be forced to live, work, and share their country with their fellow public school students, and will be forced to share a nation with a generation that believes that America is evil, Catholics are racist, and traditional views on human sexuality are bigotry. This is not a promising future for anyone, but especially our enemies. Which brings me to the Catholic reason to fix our public schools. We are called by Christ to love our enemies. 1 Corinthians 1:22 tells us, Jews demand signs and Greeks search for wisdom, but we proclaim Christ crucified. And whilst the crucifixion was a submission to God's will, it was also a fight. A humiliating, painful, and excruciating fight. Christ fell 3 times and had people kicking him and spitting him, people that he was dying for. And he had to fight to make it all the way to Calvary. Too many Christians and Catholics today refuse to get up after falling even one time. Too many Catholics refuse to even risk falling. We need to show our children the same love that Christ showed us. But how do we do this? I submit to you that the only way to do this at this moment is through politics. This is the last avenue in our culture through which we as individuals and as a people can affect change. The other side has realized this and used political tools effectively for years. Yes, politics is downstream of culture. Sometimes.
But we should not discount the power of the law when it comes to changing a society. Laws can change culture, and politics is how we change laws. Officials accountable. We don't need to unelect all of them, but once that we collect a few scalps, once a few politicians start to lose their elections over certain issues pertaining to the family, word will get out that is harmful politically, and politicians will change their behavior. As a quick aside, we tested the strategy out on the issue of women's sports, and we spent $5 million through APP in 2020 to attack Joe Biden and Democrats on the issue of allowing boys to identify as girls and compete in girls' sports. In 2020, before we had spent the money, only 5 states had introduced women's sports legislation. By 2021, 39 states had introduced legislation, over 9 passed it, including the state of Florida. Families, if organized in politics the same way that gun owners in the NRA or seniors in the AARP are organized, families that organize in politics can be an unstoppable force for change in America. But families have not been engaged in politics. We've been busy raising our kids and putting food on the table, and politics, frankly, is a low priority for most families. And that needs to change, because the minds of our children are the top priority for too many of our opponents. As Catholics, we have a duty to engage and fight politically. For far too long, families and the church have withdrawn from politics, as every other institution and industry has engaged and invested even more into these political fights. Oil companies, tobacco companies, pharmaceuticals, teachers, pornographers, the LGBT movement, Hollywood, they all created special interest groups, political action committees, and threw themselves into the political arena, and have been changing the law in our culture for decades. They knew something that we didn't, that politics isn't downstream of culture, that it's another battlefield in culture, and in fact, that the law can be one of the most powerful forces for change in the culture. Gender ideology, critical race theory, these things have power not because they're popular. They aren't. They have power because their proponents are organized effectively, extremely dedicated, and have scraped together enough political clout. Whether directly through the legislature or indirectly through the courts, these ideologies, even when held by a small minority, are implemented through raw political power, and the rest of the culture follows along eventually. So what can we do politically? First, I would argue we need to stay informed. It's essential that parents stay informed and know what is happening, not just in their own children's schools, but also politically at the local, state, and national levels. Talk to your children to figure out what's going on in their classrooms. Follow your local school board's meetings and rules. Follow the news. I know a lot of it's disheartening and disgusting. I know it's depressing. It's much easier to ignore this sort of thing completely. But it is our moral responsibility to stay informed so that we can do something about it. Who is your school board member? When is the next school board meeting? When's the next school board election? The other thing I'd argue is that we need to contact our representatives. As Father stated at the beginning of this, I was lucky enough to work with my father and got elected to Congress. I can tell you these guys are pretty sensitive about the phone calls and letters, especially the social media posts. They hate getting grief online. Call their offices, send them letters, contact your representatives. It really does make a difference, even at the national level. Thirdly, we need to support good candidates and hold them accountable. Every candidate for every level of office needs to let the public know where they stand on critical race theory, transgender ideology, everything that affects the family. Find out who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, and don't let them get away with mealy-mouthed non-answers. If you find a candidate, donate your money and your time and support that candidate. Get your friends and family to do the same. If there are no good candidates, consider running yourself. As a quick aside, I don't use it. My father had no college degree. He was a pizza guy with 10 kids, and he ended up getting elected to Congress. If we could figure it out, all of you can figure it out. My organization, American Principles Project, tries to do these things at the state and national level. But this fight will never be won unless regular parents step into the political fray in their own communities. The other side controls nearly every major institution in the culture, but they don't yet have a monopoly on politics. The media, the entertainment industry, elite colleges, and big businesses are totally on board with this new, terrible, woke regime. Winning back any sort of power in any of these areas is the project of many, many years, and I would argue probably decades, that we don't have as our country's next generation is taught to hate everything that we hold dear. The only avenue we have left to stop this ideology before it's too late is politics. We have a clear political majority if you're willing to use it. The vast, vast majority of people in this country are still decent and sane. It is a great blessing, one that we should thank God for every day, that our founders gave us a system where the people have a say in all that matters. The time for change is now. The fight before us is still winnable, but it is going to be very difficult. If we let this continue, it will be nearly impossible to avoid total catastrophe. The road ahead of us may be dire, but it is not hopeless. Before I close, I want you to know something. Our enemies think that they have this fight locked up. They aren't afraid of you. They think you won't do anything to stop them. They think you're dumb. Worse than that, they think you're evil. They think you're lazy. They think you are so wrapped up with your television and Netflix and TikTok and sports and electronics and all the garbage that they use to distract us from what really matters, that you won't stand up for your own children, your own flesh and blood. Are they right? I don't think so. I think they're wrong. But I'm not the one to answer that question. The only one that can answer that question is you. Will you let them destroy your children? Will you let them destroy our country? Or will you stand up and fight? Pray for America and pray for our children. But don't just pray for them. Fight for them too. Thank you.